This video is going to address some of the concerns that come up when you are working in a call center. If you're making inbound calls, outbound calls, if you're in sales, whatever the case may be, you are going to come across this problem. This problem has to do with what do you do when you don't understand the person on the other line. For today's lesson, I'm going to be talking about what are some things you can say when you get in a situation like that, where you didn't understand the person or there was an internet connection, a phone connection problem. What can we say and how can we do it in a way that doesn't frustrate the caller? Because that's what we want, right? We don't want to escalate a situation. We don't want to annoy or irritate the caller. So what do? What do we say? Now, there are different reasons why we wouldn't understand what they might have said. Here are some of the reasons. First of all, you have people who use vocabulary we're not used to, people who speak very, very fast English. Yes, you remember those callers. You have a lot of background noise. Maybe the caller you're talking to has kids playing or crying in the background. You have the dog barking. Maybe that caller is in public and you can hear the transportation, the cars driving by. That person put you on speaker, so now you're capturing all the sound. Or, God forbid, there is a really bad connection, right? It happens, and it's going to happen. Maybe this is one thing that you think about when you are working in these kind of jobs. Or maybe you're thinking of going into a job like this, but then you're wondering, should I not? Because you're kind of anxious about potentially this happening to you. If English is not your first language and you're making all of these calls to English speakers, then that's something that you definitely want to think about and prepare for. So what about this problem that we have with callers who, for whatever reason, we didn't understand? What do? What do we say? Casual English is very different when you're in person, right? If someone says something you didn't understand, you can say, what? What did you say? Can you repeat that again? Huh? So when you're working in a call center, though, these aren't the best practices because it might come off as rude. In fact, it would come off as rude because you don't really know that person, and there's often a lot of emotions attached to these calls. Either the caller's busy already, they just want to get off the phone. Maybe they called in and they're frustrated about something. So you want to keep in mind that one of the top tips I can give you is you have to be polite. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm going to give you some examples of some phrases you can use and some phrases you probably shouldn't use when you are asking for someone to repeat themselves so you can understand them. So let's look at one type of problem. They speak too fast. If you're making calls to English-speaking countries, you're more than likely going to encounter people who speak too fast. Now, people speak fast for different reasons. Maybe they're just used to that fast-paced life that you see in a lot of major cities like New York, LA. They are just known to drive faster, they do things quicker, they speak faster, and it really shows when you're talking to them on the phone. Now, of course, I'm generalizing, but yes, I have encountered people that speak really fast English, and it's overwhelming. The first rule of thumb is try not to interrupt them, especially if it doesn't take that long for them to say what they're going to explain. And let's say after that, you didn't capture some things. They were speaking too fast. Here's what you can say. I'm so sorry. Could you slow down a little bit? I just want to make sure I captured what you said. So I do apologize because I didn't understand everything. I tell them, could you please repeat what you said? notice that I use the word could. When you replace can with could sounds much more polite. It is so much better to use the word could in your questions. Could you please repeat yourself? I'm trying to understand what you said. I'm trying to capture everything that you said. You can also say, I want to make sure I understood you correctly. Now, you might be asking, is it even okay to make them repeat something? What if they get upset? Yes, it's okay to ask them to repeat something. But the key is, what words are you using to repeat something? The second problem is, they're not speaking too fast, but they use words that you're maybe not familiar with. Has that ever happened to you before? It could be a word, it could be a phrase, like an idiom that they used. And of course, that's going to happen if you're working with native English speakers. So what do you do? What do you say? Do you just guess, take a hint and guess what that might have meant? You probably don't want to do that because it might be really important to the information they're giving you. And again, you don't want to build that tension up with the caller. And of course, you're going to come up with some vocabulary you might not be familiar with. I mean, I see that all the time. And of course, living in the US, I've known how, depending on where you live in the US, people say things differently. And just to give you a quick example, you think of a carbonated drink like soda. Well, at least that's what I know it to be as. Living in California and the West Coast in the US, we know it as soda. But if suddenly you travel to like the southern states where you have Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, apparently they call it Coke. Whether you're drinking Coke or you're drinking another type of drink like Sprite, Dr. Pepper, they call it Coke. I'm like, really? I mean, I wouldn't have guessed. And then if you travel north to some of the northern states, they call it pop. So there are variations in language even within a country. And so if you're working in a call center, you're making calls, it's going to be different. And you may or may not understand what they're saying. So what do you say? Again, you can say, I'm sorry, what do you mean by this word? Or, I'm sorry, I'm not too familiar with this word. What do you mean by that? It's okay to ask, and it's probably better to ask instead of just not being familiar and not getting the right information you need. The less polite thing would be to interrupt them and be like, what's that? I don't understand. What's that? Just wait for them to tell you and then go forward with asking them, I'm sorry, I haven't heard of that before. Can you clarify what that means? Or I'm not familiar with that. What if you're talking to someone and there's a lot of background noise? Either the dog's barking, the kids are crying, there's another conversation in the background. What do you say to that person? Without being rude, of course. You could also say, I'm hearing a lot of background noise. Would you mind repeating that again? By letting them know that specifically it was the background noise, then hopefully they'll move away from that background noise and they'll try to make sure they're in a place where you can understand and hear them better. I'm not able to hear you that clearly. I hear some background noise on your end. On your end is kind of saying on your side, but it's more common to say on your end. Another phrase you could use is saying, there seems to be a lot of interference in the background. It's kind of difficult to hear. Could you repeat what you said? Also, if they're speaking really fast, you could say this. Would you mind speaking a little more slowly, please? The would you mind is super polite, and it's often very common when you do have the fast speakers. Would you mind speaking a little bit slowly, please? Would you mind speaking a little more slowly, please? If you think you caught what they've said, but maybe there was something that you couldn't understand at the end, you could ask them, would you mind repeating that for me one more time? Or if it's the last piece, would you mind repeating that last piece you said? What if you're dealing with a really bad phone connection? If they're speaking and suddenly there's a really bad connection, you could say, I'm sorry, there's a bad phone connection here. Would you mind repeating what you said? I used the would modal and I said, would you mind? This is a really polite way of just saying, can you please repeat yourself? And you stated why. If you're checking the connection and it's still not 100%, you want to make sure they can hear you as well. You can ask, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? How about now? Is that clear? Is my voice coming clear? These are all different ways to ask if they can hear you, especially when this is the issue. More than likely, if you're not able to hear them clearly, they might not be able to hear you clearly. All in all, you really want to make sure that your politeness shines through with your English. This is by using the words could, would you mind? And of course, whenever there's a specific issue, stating what the issue is and then requesting from them that they repeat themselves. If you have noise in the background, state, I'm sorry, there's noise in the background. Would you mind repeating yourself? That way, they know exactly why you want them to repeat themselves. Or if they use words that you're not familiar with, that is totally normal and should be expected. These tips are going to help you to make sure you have a good experience on the phone with English speakers. And of course, potentially avoid those awkward moments where you're like, what? What did they say? I don't understand what that person just said. Feel free to hit that subscribe button with notifications so that you can be the first one to get notified when I publish new lessons. Thanks so much for watching. Till next time, this is Learning English with Flor.